Eat Well, Travel Often is sponsored by Linda's Artistic Adventures, which specializes in unique, off-the-beaten-track destinations worldwide. They provide impeccable service, a sharp attention to detail, and first-hand knowledge of all the places you want to go, and those that you don't know about yet. Some people think that travel agents are a relic of the past, that booking online themselves is a good enough way to plan a vacation. But that takes a lot of time, and it's hard to know about all the best places to eat and stay and things to do. That's where the travel pros at Linda's Artistic Adventures come in. They'll help you book your once-in-a-lifetime experience. To get started on your dream vacation plans, email Linda at info@lindasartisticadventures.com and make sure to mention the Eat Well Travel Often podcast for a special gift when you book.
Welcome to Eat Well, Travel Often, a podcast about the intersection of food, travel, the environment, the mind, body, and spirit. I'm Melissa Goldberg. Food is the lens through which I look at life, where it comes from, how it's cooked, its origin. Food creates a community, and how we connect with each other through food is an expression of who we are. I hope to share with you my passion for food, from everything from book to plate. Today I'm talking with James Rich, the author of Apple, Recipes from the Orchard. James has traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to be with us. He was raised in Somerset, England, where he grew up on a cider farm. Growing up, he was deeply connected to the world of apples and learned to explore food and flavors in the kitchen with his grandmother. Welcome, James.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So, what was it like growing up with a family cider farm?
I have quite a big family, so it was fun. We actually lived, my sisters and my dad and I lived about a couple of miles down the road from the cider farm. And my cousins actually live on the cider farm. But just growing up in Somerset, it's a very rural area. It's very, very green. We get a lot of water a lot of rain in the winter. And it's an incredibly beautiful place. And we have great conditions for growing apple trees. So there are lots and lots and lots of orchards around. So just growing up in and around that was it was very fun. It was nice. It's nice to be among the nature.
It was a cider farm, but what's the difference between a cider farm and an apple farm?
So cider, in the UK, we refer to cider as hard cider, so it has alcohol in it. So cider farms are generally quite traditional, quite old farms that have been making cider for a while. In our case, we've been doing it the farm's been there for about 70 years, but my family have been in the area for hundreds of years doing it. It's making a drink. So a cider farm is making the drink, whereas an apple farm will be potentially making growing trees and harvesting them for commercial reasons, and either eating apples in supermarkets or farmers markets. The apples that we grow on a cider farm you wouldn't eat, so they're bittersweet and bitter sharp apples, and if you bit into them you'd really kind of recoil, and it would be very kind of bitter and not very palatable. So the apples that we grow you wouldn't eat. You'd have to ferment them to turn into cider.
Because in the U.S. we would call a cider farm a apple cider.
Yes, exactly.
Not no alcohol in it.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. So your cider is just what we would term apple juice.
So I guess you love apples because you wrote a book on apples.
Yeah.
What was your inspiration for this book?
For me, it's two reasons. I worked at the cider farm. We have a restaurant as well on the farm, and I worked there when I was a teenager and in my early 20s. And then I did that thing that we all do, or I think we all want to do if we don't have the opportunity, and that is like run away. So I escaped Somerset. It's like I said, a very rural area, and I wanted to kind of see the big bright lights of the city. And I went and lived in Bristol, which is just up the road. I went to university in Bath, which is a small city, and then I lived in Barcelona in Spain for a year, and then I eventually ended up in London. So I moved around a bit, and I wanted to explore, and I love traveling and seeing the world. And then you kind of well, in my case, got to my early 30s, and you start looking backwards a little bit, and I think you start revisiting where you're from. And I started kind of not getting homesick, but just really kind of appreciating where I'm from. And I'd go back and I'd realize how beautiful it is, and all my family are there, and it's just such a warm, lovely place. So it's about going home. And then the other reason I wanted to write it is, like I said, my family have been in that area working the land and making cider for many, many, many generations. The first reference to us is in 1612, in a book that was written in the area. And I wanted to celebrate them. I wanted to look back and celebrate my family and what they've achieved and what they've done. And that's the kind of dual purpose. And also I love food.
Don't we all? So I learned to cook from my mother. I remember being in the kitchen, learning from her, doing her recipes. And I read that you learned from your grandmother. What did you learn from her? Like, how did she teach you? What did you?
Trial and error, really. I still cook with her now. We have the most amazing relationship. She lives in the south of Spain now. They retired over there, and we can talk for hours and hours and hours and hours on the phone, or when I'm over there with her, and it is always about food. Well, family gossip and food. From a really young age, I spent a lot of time with her, and she was always in the kitchen, and I'd just be watching her and talking to her about the food, and then she would always let me taste things first. So she'd be making a soup or a curry or a cake or something, and she would let me taste the mix or the soup or the cake, and she'd ask my opinion on it. So before she would kind of determine what needed adding or changing about the dish, she would ask my opinion. She said, "What do you think? Do you think it needs a bit more salt, or do you think it needs a bit more sour, or what are the flavors that you're picking up, and what aren't you picking up?" And just that kind of, I think the lesson she really taught me is just to think about what I'm tasting, and through that she kind of guided me through the years, and I think we have like I said, we're very passionate about food, and we share cookbooks and recipes and all sorts.
So I have a 16-year-old son who I do the same thing with. He's very, very good with taste. So I'll be cooking something. I'll say, "Come here. What does this need?" And he can pin it out. So maybe he'll write a cookbook someday.
Yeah, no, he should. And I think it's great. I think that people often don't. Maybe this is a generalization, but I think it's really important to give children, especially with food, the opportunity to kind of tell you what they're experiencing, because children's palates and adults' palates for a start are completely different, and they can pick up on things that we can't as a developed palate. And so I think, and also it just helps build confidence in the kitchen, and means that you're not kind of stuck to the rigid recipe that you might be following, and you can actually just flex your creativity in the kitchen a bit.
That's right. My 13-year-old son, he decides he makes what he calls a mishmash, where he'll just go and start cooking and mishmash everything together, and he eats it, and it's like, go for it, do whatever you want.
Yeah, I love that. That's brilliant. Yeah, that'll turn into a recipe one day.
The mishmash, right? That's funny. So is there a favorite recipe or a favorite thing that you made with your grandmother?
Oh, wow. She is a phenomenal cook. She's so good. We now make this thing. She's in Spain, like I said, and we cook this thing called a fideu, which is it's actually a type of paella, but it's with pasta instead of rice, small kind of bits of pasta. So we make that together. We do a seafood one, which is great.
No apples in it, though.
No, there aren't any apples in it. Actually, the one of the recipes in the book that's from her actually is a breakfast that she serves us, which is caramelized apples and black pudding, with some like white crusty toast. I've had that breakfast for many years, and it's absolutely delicious with some HP sauce or brown sauce as we have in the UK, which I don't think you have here.
No, I don't think so. So, growing up and working on the farm, many farms you use everything. You use every part of the animal or every part of the plant. Did this have any impact on the way you created your recipes? Or
yeah, Absolutely, and that was actually where the original idea of the book came from. So about 15 years ago, when I was working in the restaurant, we sourced everything locally. We used things from the farm that were available, so obviously the cider and the apple juice and the raw product as well. And then we'd use them in the dishes, and we'd have customers coming in, tasting the food, and then asking us questions. Oh, look, that's really interesting. How did you use the cider in that dish? Or that apple cake was delicious. What's what's the recipe? And I was talking to the cook one day, Eve, who is still working there and is wonderful. And I was saying, we should like write down some of the recipes and print them off and just like give them to customers, like little pamphlets, and just say, have a go at making it at home. Take some cider back with you and make the stew that we've made today. That's where the idea started, and then obviously like work and life gets in the way, and fast forward 15 years and it's not happened. And I kind of revisit,
because you were traveling the world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And getting distracted by other things. I kind of revisited the idea and kind of thought, well, actually maybe people would be interested in learning a little bit more about how we use the produce in the dishes. So I really believe, and I talk about it in the book, it's quite difficult with apples actually in the varieties, because it can vary so much as to where you're from, even within the same country or region. But I really encourage people to get out there, speak to local growers, local farmers markets and things like that, and use the produce that's grown very locally to them and that's in season, because it's such a better quality of flavour.
A lot of your recipes, you end up with the apple cores and the skins. Mm-hmm. Do you have something that you do with them?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. So never throw away skins or cores is my tip. You can pop them in a little bag and put them in the freezer and store them up until you have a big enough quantity or large enough quantity to use. And a really easy thing to make is apple cider vinegar. You can make it yourself. You don't need to buy it. It takes a little bit of time and a little bit of patience, but it's definitely worth experimenting with. But actually, the thing I probably make more than anything else is just I boil down the cores and the peels to extract the pectin from them, and then I use the solution. So I put the peels and the cores into a saucepan, put some water in with them, just so it just very lightly covers it. Boil that down, bring it up to a boil for a couple of minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and then I sieve out the cores and the peels, which you can discard then, and then what you're left with is a water solution that's extracted the pectin from the cores and the peel. And what that is great for is adding to any jams or jellies or anything that you have like that will help give it that kind of jam.
Really, that's so interesting. So then instead of using like a commercial pectin, you can just use that?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you figure out how much to use?
That's a little bit of trial and error. I haven't quite nailed the exact science between the difficulty that you have is that each apple variety will have a different level of pectin within the cores and the peels, and also depending on whether it was in season or not, how much sugar was in the apple will determine the levels. So you're never going to get a direct replica of the batch you made before, for example. So it is a bit of trial and error, and sometimes it kind of works great, and it really, the jelly will stiffen quite a lot, and other times it will not work so well. But I don't like to waste in the kitchen, and I think that the times it hasn't worked, there's been 10 times that has worked. So
right,
give it a go.
And a runny jam is still a good jam.
Exactly. Yeah, it still tastes great on a scone.
Right. So Michael Pollan wrote a book,
yes.
Botany of Desire, where the idea of sweet is synonymous with apples. How do you think about the sweetness of the different apples when you make your recipes? Like, how do you choose the apples? Do you choose it by the sweetness, or the crispness?
Yeah. So generally, when I'm making things like, if I'm making juices or where I'm trying to extract the juice, or a recipe where I need to extract the juice, I'll go for sweeter. Generally, if I'm making like a salad or anything like that, then it will be something that's a little bit more sharp and a bit more crisp, so you have that texture and that bite. And then within stews, I generally try to err on the side of a bit sharp as well. I always think it's better to use a sharper apple for something savory, just because often it will help kind of cut through the flavor of
So a sharp apple would be like a Granny Smith?
Yeah. From the supermarket, a Granny Smith would be sharp. Yeah.
So I just want to remind everybody, I'm speaking with James Rich, the author of Apple, Recipes from the Orchard. So in the U.S., there's probably thousands of apples grown, but there's only a few in the market. Maybe 5 or 6, McIntosh, Granny Smith, Gala. Probably the UK, it's the same thing.
Yeah, actually, really interesting. So when I first got the commission to write the book, it was very exciting. And they said to me, so we're going to publish in the UK, United States, Canada, Australia, which blew my mind. I couldn't believe
That's
it.
awesome.
Quite frankly, like to be told your first book's going to be published in all those amazing places. But what they wanted from the book, therefore, were varieties that were easily accessible by people in those places. And I thought, well, there's like nearly 8,000 varieties globally grown. There are 4,500 approximately grown here in the United States. We have about 2,500 in the UK. And how am I going to include all of those varieties? And so what I did, I talked to them about it. I really wanted to include a lot of heritage varieties, which was quite difficult. And what I did is I asked a friend who lives in Australia to take a photograph of the supermarket shelf, the Apple supermarket shelf in his local supermarket. And I asked some of my friends here in the United States to do the same thing. And I did the same thing in the UK. And if I were to show, I should actually print these off and show you. But if I were to print them off and show you side by side, you wouldn't be able to tell which country those pictures have come from, because they basically look the same. You have your Granny Smiths in each of those countries, the Galas, Braeburns, all of those types. They're all present in those different countries. Now, we're talking about like 7 to 12 varieties maximum on the supermarket shelves in those 3 countries. And like I said, there are like up to 7,000 varieties globally. So we're missing out on a huge variety of apple on our shelves. So I think those apples are very good. They've been bred and cultivated to be very strong. They're very good at being transported. They have a lovely crisp bite. They are mostly on the sweet side, with the exception of Granny Smith. And they kind of deliver what you want from an eating apple. So, I'm not knocking them. I just think that this is why I encourage people to try and get out there and speak to local growers who will have very different varieties to those on the supermarket shelves. Because, you get apples that have like notes of tobacco in the flavor, or pineapple, or strawberry, or all sorts of different kind of notes on the flavor profile, which is it's a wonder when you get that into the kitchen and you start putting it in pies and in stews and jams. It's
Do you have
really
a favorite
great.
Apple?
Oh, I get asked this a lot. It's really difficult. So for me, if I was making a pie, we have the Bramley apples in the UK, which is unfortunate that you don't seem to have them over here. But they're a really famous cooking apple. So it's very sharp. You need to add sugar to it.
Yeah, I've never heard of that apple.
Yeah, so the first tree actually that it grew from is still it's still alive in Nottinghamshire, I think it is, in the UK. Anyway, it's a great cooking apple. It's very, very sharp, so you wouldn't eat it raw. You have to add sugar with it or do other things with it to make it palatable. But what it does is when you cook it, it stews, and the flesh of the apple completely breaks down. So you get that beautiful apple sauce, sweet, sticky, gooey. Throw some cinnamon in there and some nutmeg, and it's divine. You can make a delicious apple pie with that. So I love cooking with that one if I'm trying to create something like that, like a pie or even a cake. But if it's for eating, I like the fairly sharp apples. So we have Cox's apples, Cox's orange pippins in the UK. You have a similar one here. I like, those kind of things. More sharp than sweet.
So I think in your book you categorize this taste or the sweetness of apples. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so apples are categorized into 4 different categories. We have sweet apples and sharp apples. Excuse me. Sweet are kind of does what it says on the tin. They are very sweet, and they are the ones that we will traditionally find in our supermarkets, or that we can just eat. So you can take a sweet apple, you can pick it off the tree, and you can bite into it, and it'll be absolutely delicious.
So that's like a Red Delicious or a Gala apple,
exactly,
or
Red
Fuji
Delicious.
apple.
Yeah, all of those. Yeah, they're all sweet apples. And then we have the sharp category, which are actually Granny Smith fall into this category, but they're generally apples that you need to perhaps do something to in order to make them palatable. So the ones that are on the more sharp side, you'll need to add sugar to them, or you'll have to cook them down in order to make them tasty. But yeah, Granny Smith would fall into that category. And then you have bittersweet and bitter sharp. Now these apples are they grow in abundance where I'm from in Somerset, but they, like I said at the beginning, you wouldn't want to bite into them because they were very, very sharp, very, very bitter, and actually could give you a bit of a tummy upset if you ate too much of them. But what you need to do to those apples is you either need to cook with them, and add flavor and add sugar and things like that, or you need to, what we do obviously is press them for the juice, and we turn that into cider.
So speaking of cider, you use cider in a lot of your recipes.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a particular cider you like best, or the one from your farm?
Yeah, I was about to say Rich's cider that my dad makes.
What's the brand?
Rich's.
Rich. Oh,
yeah,
wow.
it's our surname. It's I like, my favorite personally is a dry, still hard cider that has been unfiltered or has not very much hasn't been filtered very much. Excuse me. The reason why I like that is because it works really well in savoury dishes. There's not been too much done to it. It's a very natural product, and so it goes great with meats and vegetables, root vegetables in particular. It's just like a really hearty, strong, reliable flavour that you can use as a base and then add other things to. However, having said that, the sparkling sweeter ciders are great for cocktails. So if you're looking for a cocktail that's slightly different, then you can incorporate a sparkling sweet cider into cocktails, and it tastes great as well.
So cider seems to have having a huge resurgence in the U.S.
Yeah.
So you've been traveling the U.S. Mm-hmm. Have you found a good cider?
Oh, I have. So I was in New York last weekend for New York Cider Week, which is happening at the moment. And I'm not gonna remember the name of it now, am I? That's really annoying. There are loads of ciders here. What's great about the US is that you have this really exciting and very active craft cider movement, I suppose you could call it.
It's really growing.
Lots of very small, and I think that's probably off the back of your craft beer movement as well, which obviously happened a little while ago. But there are lots and lots of little small cideries, as you call them over here, popping up and making some really quite exciting stuff. So Eve's is one of them I've tried here, which is delicious. I know that Brooklyn Cider House has a whole variety of different ciders on tap, and you can go along and you can taste them, which is really fun. And I've tried Original Sin, which is nice. There are loads. I think the variety. Yeah.
We have one that's ciders. Right here in Newark called Ironbound Cider.
Ironbound.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I've not heard of that one. Yeah, it's great. I think it's really exciting, and I've been asked a lot of questions about people adding things like pineapple and orange and things like that to ciders, or making them quite sweet. I personally don't mind that because I think that unfortunately, I think it's due to prohibition, cider in the United States completely died out and wasn't seen for many, many years. It's really kind of made a comeback in the last decade or so. And so still a lot of people, when I'm talking to them, are a little unsure as to what we're talking about when we talk about cider. So I think it's really exciting that people are revisiting it, they're learning about it.
Right, because we call it hard cider. Because cider here is still fermented, but it's not fermented to the point where
The alcohol.
it's alcohol. And then there's apple juice, which is just kind of, I don't even know what it is. It's like a watery down. Cider is like got a strong flavor.
Yeah.
And actually, when my cider starts to go bad, I stick it in a jar and I make apple cider vinegar out of it. You just leave it.
Exactly. Let it do its thing. Natural. Mm-hmm.
So you live in Somerset and London in the UK. You've been traveling around the US. What are things you like about traveling around the US?
I love the United States. I am a big fan. I've been fortunate enough to travel to quite a few states now through this last couple of months, but also I have friends here, so I get to come and see them. And I think that the food scene here in the United States is absolutely amazing. I think I spent a bit of time down in Texas, down in Austin, and I was blown away by the Tex-Mex food down there. The barbecue food, wow, it's so good. I loved it, and I'm obsessed at the moment. I'm watching old videos on YouTube of how to make a really traditional Texan chili. And I'm obsessed with that, so that's going to be one of the next recipes I'm going to try and develop, is my version of that.
So the UK version of Texas will be your next book?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. Any excuse to go and travel around there. California, I was just in California, and the food scene there is amazing. You have access to really great produce here, and that's great. And then obviously here in New Jersey, New York as well, the food scene is different, but it's equally as good. And I've never tasted a pizza like I've tasted a pizza in New York. So I love
it's
spending
the water.
time here.
No.
Yeah, it's the water. Yeah.
So do you have, going back to London,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a favorite place or a restaurant, like off beaten path, that you would recommend to?
If anybody's in London and they want one of the best meals that they will ever eat, and it's not incredibly expensive either, check out a place called Jikoni, and it's Jikoni. It's a restaurant that's run by somebody who I consider a dear friend now, Ravinda, and she is, and this kind of I think summarizes London quite well. London is a melting pot of cultures, and we are so fortunate that means that our food scene is so diverse. And what Ravinda does is, she is from Nigerian background. She also has Indian connections as well, and she was brought up in Britain. And what she does,
she's a real melting pot.
She's amazing. And what she does is, she basically has kind of created her own genre of food through her heritage, and she takes things like a shepherd's pie, which is really traditional British food, and she puts her spin on it, in that she does a version with lamb, I think it is, and she adds spices, Indian spices, I believe, to it, and it's just like takes it to a whole new level. So yeah, if you're in London, go check out Jikoni.
Okay,
it's very
definitely.
Very good.
So now, going back to your farm, are there lessons that you, working amongst the orchards and the farm, that ring true today, that you have brought through your life, that you?
I think the main, I've not been asked that before. I think that the thing I would say is that where I'm from, we're a very close-knit community. I have, like I said, a large family, but we're very, very close. And I think I think it's probably true of anybody from a rural area where you kind of know everybody, is that kind of sense of community, and that kind of like, we all do each other favors, and we're all there for each other. And I think that that's something that's kind of taken me through, and that kind of.
So your sense of community, did that come out in the way you cook and the way you?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, definitely. Like, my kitchen's an open kitchen. I'm not somebody who's precious. If somebody wants to give me a hand in the kitchen, I would be very happy for them to do that. I don't make very what I would call fancy food. All of my food is, I think, what you call here like family style. Like, it's like sharing platters, and it's all very rustic. And I don't I'm not somebody who cares for it to look pretty, as long as it tastes absolutely delicious. So yeah, that kind of sense of community, and like every memory I have, every happy memory I have as a kid really is around the table with my family, and there's a lot of them. So yeah,
food brings everybody together.
It does, yeah.
And it brings community. And have you cooked? Has your family eaten everything from your cookbook?
They haven't eaten I don't think there's one person who's tasted everything. My niece is obsessed with the blackberry and apple jam. She loves it, and I can't make enough to keep up with the amount that she's only 3. I can't keep up with the amount that she eats. My sister loves, there's a cheddar cheese and chicken crumble in the book. My sister loves that. The cakes go down very, very well. Yeah, I think that between them, they've probably tasted everything, but there's not one person that's gone through the entire book yet.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I wish you the best of luck on this book.
Thank you very much.
I can't wait to make all the recipes and, eat well and travel often.
Yeah, I will. Thank you very much. It's really lovely to be here. Thank you.
Let me tell you about my book to plate experience cooking with James' cookbook, Apples, Recipes from the Orchard. I could not decide where I wanted to start in this book, so I skimmed the book for what I thought would be the tastiest. The maple apple upside down cake jumped out at me. Maple syrup and apples? Great combo. What could go wrong? Well, first thing you should know about this book is every recipe is in both metric and imperial measurements. I found it a bit confusing, but of course, I didn't even read the notes in the front of the book that said do not mix them. So if you choose to cook in metrics, you have to stay in metrics. Then, cooking this cake, I made 2 big mistakes. One, I chose a spring-form cake pan and did not realize that you first make a syrup and you pour that over the apples, and then you pour the cake batter on top. Well, the syrup oozed out of the pan. And I also didn't notice my oven was set at 450 and not 350, so the top of the cake burned. Well, after pulling out the oven, I was able to salvage it by slicing off the burnt part. It tasted delicious, but it didn't look so good. The second time I made it, it did come out perfect with the correct pan and the correct temperature. So don't make the same mistakes I did. I also made Somerset apple chutney, apple crisp, otherwise known as dehydrated apples, and the apple thyme cheddar scones. The chutney makes a lot, so if you're proficient in water bath canning, I suggest you preserve it. It makes about 7 half-pint jars. It's a great condiment for cheese and crackers. I usually make my scones without eggs, so I was curious what the texture of these scones would be like. They were moist and delicious, great for a Sunday brunch. The dehydrated apples gave me some trouble. Recipe calls for 40 minutes in the oven. I think I had them in for 2 hours, probably more, and they still weren't fully dehydrated. I guess it could have been the type of apples, it could have been my oven, but then I Googled dehydrated apples, and most of the recipes had them in the oven for over 2 hours. So I suggest if you decide to make dehydrated apples, just Google and use the recipe from the website. Apples Recipe from the Orchard is a great cookbook if you love apples. For me, it couldn't come at a better time of year. Fall season when my refrigerator is overflowing with apples from my CSA. Thank you, James Rich, for taking the time to talk with me. If you want to find out more about James, you can go to eatwelltraveloften.net, where you can find show notes, recipes, travel tips, and more. You can reach me via email at melissa@eatwelltraveloften.net or on social media. I'd love to hear your comments and recommendations. And as always, eat well and travel often.